In a quiet, unassuming town in Ohio, where life moved at a slower pace and dreams often stayed tucked away in the corners of people's hearts, there lived a young girl named Elena Martinez. Her world was small but filled with warmth, thanks to her father, Miguel. Miguel worked long hours as a janitor at the local community college, mopping floors, emptying trash cans, and ensuring the building was spotless for students and professors alike. Though his job wasn't glamorous, Miguel took pride in it because it allowed him to provide for his daughter. Elena, on the other hand, had a spark that couldn't be contained by their modest surroundings. From an early age, she showed an insatiable curiosity about the world around her. She asked questions no one else thought to ask. Why does the moon change shape? How do birds know when to fly south? What makes numbers behave the way they do? Her mind was like a sponge, soaking up knowledge wherever she could find it, and luckily for Elena, her father understood the value of learning. Miguel may not have had much formal education himself. He'd dropped out of high school to support his family, but he believed deeply in the power of books. Every evening after work, he'd stop by the college library before heading home. The librarians knew him well. They'd let him borrow old textbooks and discarded reference materials that were destined for the recycling bin. These worn-out books became treasures in Elena's hands. They opened doors to worlds she never knew existed, worlds of math, science, history, and literature. By the time Elena was 10 years old, she had already devoured countless volumes. One day, while flipping through a discarded algebra textbook, she stumbled upon a chapter about equations. Something clicked inside her brain. It was as if the universe had whispered a secret meant just for her. Before long, she was scribbling solutions to problems most adults would struggle with, using scraps of paper or the margins of old newspapers. Math wasn't just a subject to Elena. It was a language, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Her teachers quickly noticed her talent. Mrs. Thompson, her fifth-grade teacher, once remarked during a parent-teacher conference, "Elena is extraordinary. I've never seen anyone grasp concepts so quickly." But while her teachers admired her intellect, not everyone shared their enthusiasm. Some kids teased her relentlessly, calling her names like nerd and bookworm. Worse still, they mocked her clothes, hand-me-downs from cousins, and her lunchbox, which usually contained simple meals like peanut butter sandwiches or leftover rice and beans. At first, the teasing hurt. Elena would come home crying, asking her father why the other children didn't like her. Miguel knelt down beside her, looked into her eyes, and said, "Mija, don't let them dim your light. You're special, and what you have inside you is worth more than all their fancy shoes and shiny backpacks combined." Those words stuck with Elena. Slowly but surely, she learned to tune out the negativity and focus on what truly mattered: her love for learning. As the years passed, Elena's brilliance only grew stronger. In middle school, she joined the math club and began participating in regional competitions. At first, she was nervous. She'd never competed against kids from bigger schools with better resources, but her determination carried her through. By 8th grade, she had won first place in a statewide math competition, earning a full scholarship to attend an elite prep school 2 towns over. The prep school was a culture shock. For the first time, Elena found herself surrounded by classmates who came from wealthy families, wore designer clothes, and spoke confidently about their plans to attend Ivy League universities. She felt out of place, like a fish swimming upstream. But instead of letting self-doubt creep in, Elena reminded herself of her father's advice. Don't let them dim your light. Her hard work paid off. By senior year, Elena had earned top grades, impressed her teachers, and caught the attention of several prestigious colleges. When the acceptance letter from Harvard arrived in the mail, Elena nearly fainted. She ran to her father, waving the envelope wildly, tears streaming down her face. Miguel hugged her tightly, his own eyes brimming with pride. "You did it, mija," he whispered. "You're going to show the world what you're made of." But even as Elena prepared to leave for Cambridge, Massachusetts, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Harvard was a far cry from her hometown, and she worried about how she'd fit in among students whose parents were CEOs, politicians, and doctors. Still, she refused to let fear hold her back. After all, she'd faced challenges before, and overcome them every time. Little did Elena know her journey was about to take a dramatic turn. The same resilience that had carried her this far would soon be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. But one thing was certain. Whatever lay ahead, Elena Martinez was ready to face it head-on. Elena's first few weeks at Harvard were a whirlwind of emotions. The sprawling campus, with its red brick buildings and manicured lawns, felt like a world away from the small Ohio town she called home. Everywhere she looked, there were reminders of how different her life was from those around her. Her classmates carried sleek laptops and wore designer clothes, while Elena stuck to her trusty second-hand backpack and thrift store blazers. She often found herself eating alone in the cafeteria, unsure of how to approach the groups of students laughing and chatting over gourmet meals. Despite feeling out of place, Elena threw herself into her studies. She attended lectures with a notebook always at the ready, scribbling down every word her professors said. Her schedule was packed with challenging courses, advanced calculus, quantum mechanics, and philosophy, but she thrived on the intellectual stimulation. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded by people who shared her passion for learning. Still, there was an invisible barrier between her and her peers. They talked about their summers spent traveling abroad or interning at prestigious companies, experiences Elena could only dream of. One day, during a particularly difficult physics seminar, Elena met Professor Richard Langley for the first time. He was a towering figure in the field of theoretical physics, known not only for his groundbreaking research, but also for his sharp tongue and intimidating demeanor. Students whispered about him in hushed tones, calling him the gatekeeper, because he seemed determined to weed out anyone he deemed unworthy of his class. His lectures were legendary, not just for their complexity, but for the biting remarks he made when students failed to keep up. On this particular afternoon, Langley walked into the lecture hall carrying a stack of papers. His suit was perfectly tailored, and his silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Without so much as a greeting, he launched into a discussion about quantum entanglement, filling the board with equations that left most of the class struggling to follow along. Elena, however, leaned forward in her seat, her pen flying across the page as she worked through each problem step by step. At one point, Langley paused mid-lecture and turned to the room. "Let's see if anyone here can solve this," he said, gesturing to a particularly complicated equation on the board. The classroom fell silent. Most students avoided eye contact, hoping they wouldn't be called on. But Elena raised her hand, tentatively, her heart pounding. "Yes?" Langley asked, raising an eyebrow as he scanned the room and noticed her. "I think I might have an answer," Elena replied softly, standing up when prompted. She walked to the front of the room, clutching her notebook tightly. As she began explaining her solution, Langley's expression shifted from mild interest to thinly veiled skepticism. When she finished, instead of offering praise or constructive feedback, he crossed his arms and smirked. "Interesting attempt," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But perhaps you should stick to mopping floors like your dad." The words hit Elena like a punch to the gut. A wave of heat rose to her cheeks as the entire room erupted into nervous laughter. Some students glanced away uncomfortably, while others snickered openly. Elena stood frozen, gripping the edge of the podium to steady herself. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and vanish from sight. But deep down, beneath the sting of embarrassment, something else stirred. A quiet resolve. She returned to her seat without saying another word, her mind racing. How could someone so brilliant be so cruel? It wasn't just what he'd said, it was the way he'd said it, as if her background somehow disqualified her from participating in the conversation. For the rest of the lecture, Elena stared straight ahead, refusing to let anyone see the tears welling up in her eyes. That evening, back in her dorm room, Elena replayed the scene over and over in her head. She thought about calling her father, but she didn't want to worry him. Instead, she opened her laptop and started researching quantum mechanics late into the night. Each article she read, each equation she solved, fueled her determination to prove Langley wrong, not for revenge, but because she knew she belonged in that classroom just as much as anyone else. Over the next few days, Elena kept a low profile. She avoided eye contact with Langley during lectures and focused on mastering the material outside of class. She sought guidance from other professors, including Dr. Anika Patel, a kind and encouraging physicist who specialized in string theory. Dr. Patel quickly recognized Elena's potential and invited her to join a study group for advanced students. For the first time since arriving at Harvard, Elena felt like she had found her tribe. Under Dr. Patel's mentorship, Elena began exploring new ideas and pushing the boundaries of her understanding. One evening, while working on a particularly tricky problem set, she stumbled upon an intriguing concept. What if certain aspects of string theory could be applied to quantum entanglement in a way no one had considered before? Excited by the possibility, she spent hours sketching diagrams and running calculations. By morning, she had developed a rough framework for a hypothesis that challenged conventional thinking. Dr. Patel was impressed when Elena presented her findings. "This is remarkable work," she said, her eyes lighting up. "Have you thought about presenting it at the upcoming seminar? Professor Langley has invited some of the top physicists in the country to speak." Elena hesitated. The idea of facing Langley again made her stomach churn. But then she remembered her father's words. Don't let them dim your light. If she backed down now, she'd be letting Langley win. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "I'll do it," she said, firmly. As the date of the seminar approached, Elena prepared tirelessly. She rehearsed her presentation until she could recite it in her sleep, double-checked every calculation, and practiced explaining her ideas in simple terms so even non-experts could understand. On the morning of the event, she dressed carefully, choosing her best outfit, a navy blue blazer paired with black slacks. Standing in front of the mirror, she gave herself a pep talk. "You've got this," she whispered. "Just stay calm and focus." When she arrived at the auditorium, it was already buzzing with activity. Students and faculty members filled the rows, chatting excitedly about the guest speakers. Elena spotted Langley near the front, engrossed in conversation with a visiting physicist. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if her hypothesis was flawed? What if everyone laughed at her again? But then she reminded herself why she was there. This wasn't about proving Langley wrong. It was about contributing something meaningful to the field she loved. With renewed confidence, she took her seat and waited for her turn to shine. Little did she know, the day of the seminar arrived and Elena felt a mix of nerves and determination coursing through her veins. The auditorium was packed with students, professors, and visiting physicists from around the world. The air buzzed with anticipation as everyone waited to hear groundbreaking ideas from some of the brightest minds in science. Elena sat near the back of the room, clutching her notes tightly, trying to steady her breathing. Dr. Patel had assured her that she was ready, but Elena couldn't shake the fear of being judged again, especially by Professor Langley. She glanced toward the front of the room where he stood, chatting casually with a guest speaker. His confident demeanor reminded her of the sting of his words. "Perhaps you should stick to mopping floors like your dad." That memory still lingered, but it no longer fueled anger in her heart. Instead, it strengthened her resolve. This wasn't about revenge or proving him wrong. This was about showing what she was capable of. As the presentations began, Elena listened intently to the speakers who came before her. Each one dazzled the audience with complex theories and cutting-edge research. Some discussed black holes, others explored dark matter, and a few delved into quantum computing. Elena admired their brilliance but also noticed how technical their explanations were. Many in the audience seemed lost, struggling to follow along. It occurred to her that simplicity could be just as powerful as complexity, if not more so, when her name was finally called. Elena rose from her seat, her heart pounding like a drum. All eyes turned to her as she walked to the front of the room. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Isn't she the janitor's daughter?" Someone muttered, loudly enough for those nearby to hear. Elena ignored them, focusing instead on the whiteboard ahead. She picked up the marker and took a deep breath, reminding herself of why she was there. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice surprisingly steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I'd like to share an idea I've been working on, a new perspective on string theory and its potential connection to quantum entanglement." A murmur of curiosity spread through the room. String theory was notoriously abstract, even among physicists, and attempts to link it to quantum mechanics often ended in frustration. Most people assumed such challenges were reserved for seasoned researchers, not undergraduates. Elena sensed their skepticism but pressed on. She started by drawing a simple diagram on the board, a series of interconnected loops representing strings vibrating at different frequencies. "We know that particles can behave like waves," she explained, turning briefly to face the audience. "But what if these vibrations aren't random? What if they're part of a larger pattern, one we haven't fully understood yet?" Her explanation was clear and concise, avoiding unnecessary jargon. She spoke slowly, making sure everyone could follow along. As she continued, she introduced her hypothesis: that certain patterns in string vibrations might explain the mysterious phenomenon of quantum entanglement, where two particles remain connected regardless of distance. To illustrate her point, she wrote out a series of equations, each building upon the last. At first, the room remained quiet, save for the occasional scratch of pencils taking notes. But as Elena progressed, something shifted. People leaned forward, in their seats, their expressions changing from polite interest to genuine fascination. Even the visiting physicists, who had initially regarded her presentation as a formality, began nodding thoughtfully. Professor Langley, seated near the front, crossed his arms and furrowed his brow. At first, his expression was one of disbelief, as though he expected her theory to fall apart at any moment. But as Elena delved deeper, explaining how her model addressed inconsistencies in existing frameworks, his skepticism gave way to intrigue. He uncrossed his arms and leaned closer, studying the whiteboard intently. Elena didn't notice his reaction. She was too focused on delivering her presentation, pouring every ounce of passion and knowledge into her words. By the time she reached her conclusion, the room was completely silent. She stepped back from the whiteboard, her hands trembling slightly, and looked out at the audience. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then applause erupted, slowly at first, then growing louder and more enthusiastic. People stood up, clapping and cheering. One of the visiting physicists, Dr. Helen Carter, rose from her seat and approached the podium. "This is extraordinary," she said, addressing the entire room. "Miss Martinez has just proposed a framework that bridges gaps we've struggled with for decades. Her work deserves serious consideration." The praise was overwhelming, but Elena's eyes instinctively sought out Professor Langley. He was still sitting, his face pale and unreadable. For a moment, she wondered if he would dismiss her again, perhaps accusing her of plagiarism or overreach. But instead, he stood up slowly and walked toward her. Elena braced herself, unsure of what to expect. When Langley stopped in front of her, he hesitated, searching for words. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, "Miss Martinez, I must admit, I underestimated you. Your hypothesis is remarkable. If proven correct, it could redefine our understanding of quantum mechanics." His admission stunned the room into silence once more. No one had ever heard Langley apologize, not publicly at least. Elena blinked, taken aback by his sincerity. After a pause, she nodded. "Thank you," she replied softly. "But my goal isn't to prove anyone wrong. It's to push boundaries and find answers. That's what science is all about." Langley nodded, his usual arrogance replaced by humility. "Indeed," he said quietly. Then, without another word, he returned to his seat, leaving Elena to bask in the glow of her achievement. After the seminar ended, Elena was swarmed by fellow students and faculty members eager to discuss her findings. Dr. Patel hugged her tightly, tears in her eyes. You did it, Elena, she whispered. You truly did it. For the first time since arriving at Harvard, Elena felt like she belonged. The mocking whispers and judgmental stares no longer mattered. What mattered was the impact of her work and the realization that she had earned her place among the brightest minds in the field. Still, she knew this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more skeptics to win over, and countless hours of research to refine her hypothesis. But as she left the auditorium that evening, surrounded by newfound respect and admiration, Elena felt invincible. She had touched the whiteboard and stunned everyone, including herself, and now the possibilities seemed endless. The days following Elena's presentation at the seminar were a whirlwind of attention and acclaim. News of her groundbreaking hypothesis spread like wildfire across campus, and soon it reached far beyond Harvard's ivy-covered walls. Journalists called her professors seeking interviews. Bloggers wrote glowing articles about the janitor's daughter who stunned Harvard, and social media buzzed with admiration for the young woman who had dared to challenge conventional wisdom. First, Elena found the sudden spotlight overwhelming. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. Her life had always been quiet, focused on books and equations rather than publicity. But as messages of support poured in from strangers around the world, she began to realize the significance of what she had accomplished. Her work hadn't just impressed experts, it had inspired ordinary people who saw themselves in her story. A reminder that brilliance could come from anywhere, regardless of background or circumstances. One morning, as Elena sat in the library reviewing her notes, Dr. Patel approached her with an excited smile. "Elena," she said, handing over a printed email, "you've been invited to present your hypothesis at an international physics conference next month. It's one of the most prestigious events in the field." Elena stared at the invitation, her heart racing. This was bigger than anything she'd imagined. The conference would bring together leading scientists, Nobel laureates, and researchers from all corners of the globe. To stand among them, to share her ideas on such a grand stage, felt surreal. Yet, despite her nerves, she accepted without hesitation. After everything she'd overcome, this felt like the next step in her journey. As preparations for the conference began, Elena threw herself into refining her hypothesis. She spent countless hours running simulations, consulting textbooks, and collaborating with Dr. Patel to ensure her theory held up under scrutiny. Late nights in the lab became her routine, fueled by coffee and sheer determination. Though the workload was exhausting, she relished every moment knowing how much was at stake. Meanwhile, word of Elena's success reached her hometown. A local newspaper published a feature article titled, "From Ohio to Harvard: How One Girl Defied the Odds." The piece highlighted her humble beginnings, her father's unwavering support, and her rise to prominence in the academic world. When Miguel saw the headline, he broke down in tears. For years, he'd worked tirelessly to give his daughter opportunities he never had, and now, seeing her achievement celebrated, filled him with immense pride. Back at Harvard, Elena noticed a subtle shift in how people treated her. Classmates who had once dismissed her as the janitor's daughter now greeted her warmly, eager to discuss her research. Even some of the professors who had underestimated her began acknowledging her contributions more openly. While Elena appreciated the change in attitude, she remained grounded. She knew that respect earned through hard work was far more valuable than fleeting praise. Professor Langley, too, underwent a transformation. In the weeks after the seminar, he made a conscious effort to mentor struggling students, offering guidance and encouragement where before there had only been criticism. Though he rarely spoke directly to Elena, his actions spoke volumes. He assigned her name to a scholarship fund for underrepresented students pursuing careers in STEM fields, a gesture that surprised many but signaled his commitment to fostering inclusivity in academia. When the day of the international conference finally arrived, Elena traveled to Geneva, Switzerland, where the event was being held. The venue was breathtaking, a modern convention center overlooking Lake Geneva, surrounded by snow-capped mountains. As she walked through the bustling halls filled with physicists exchanging ideas, Elena felt both exhilarated and intimidated. These were the giants of her field, the very people whose papers she had studied late into the night. Her presentation was scheduled for the final day of the conference, giving her ample time to attend other sessions and absorb new perspectives. She listened intently as speakers discussed topics ranging from astrophysics to artificial intelligence, taking copious notes and asking thoughtful questions during Q&A sessions. By the time her turn came, she felt prepared, not just intellectually, but emotionally. When Elena stepped onto the stage, the auditorium fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her, including those of some of the most respected minds in science. Taking a deep breath, she began her presentation, speaking clearly and confidently. Using slides and diagrams, she explained her hypothesis in detail, emphasizing its potential applications and implications for future research. As she spoke, she noticed nods of approval and murmurs of agreement rippling through the crowd. By the end of her talk, the room erupted into applause. Scientists approached her afterward, congratulating her and asking follow-up questions. One physicist even suggested collaborating on further experiments to test her theory. It was a dream come true, a validation not just of her intellect, but of her perseverance in the face of adversity. That evening, as Elena stood outside the convention center gazing at the serene beauty of Lake Geneva, she reflected on how far she'd come. From the small apartment she shared with her father to the global stage of scientific innovation, her journey had been anything but easy. But each challenge had shaped her, teaching her resilience, humility, and the importance of staying true to herself. Later that night, she received a call from Miguel. His voice cracked with emotion as he told her how proud he was. "Mija, you've made history," he said. "Not just for our family, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." Tears welled up in Elena's eyes as she replied, "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. You taught me to believe in myself when no one else did." Returning to Harvard, Elena continued to push boundaries, refining her hypothesis and exploring new avenues of research. Her work caught the attention of major institutions, and offers for fellowships and grants poured in. Yet despite her growing fame, she remained committed to using her platform to uplift others. She started mentoring high school students from underserved communities, encouraging them to pursue careers in STEM. One day, while visiting her old prep school to deliver a motivational speech, Elena met a shy teenager named Maria, who reminded her of herself at that age. Maria confided in Elena about the bullying she faced because of her love for math. Moved by the girl's courage, Elena spent hours talking to her, sharing stories of her own struggles and triumphs. Before leaving, she handed Maria a worn copy of a calculus textbook, one of the same books her father had brought home years ago. "Never stop asking questions," Elena told her. "The answers are worth fighting for." For Elena, the journey was far from over. She knew there would be more obstacles ahead, more skeptics to win over, and countless hours of painstaking research. But she also knew that every equation solved, every boundary pushed, and every life touched brought her closer to fulfilling her purpose. She had proven that brilliance knows no boundaries, and that sometimes the most unexpected individuals hold the power to change the world. And as for Professor Langley, he eventually retired from teaching but remained a vocal supporter of Elena's work, often recounting the moment he underestimated the girl who touched the whiteboard and changed everything. Elena's life after the international conference was a whirlwind of opportunities and challenges. The recognition she received opened doors that had once seemed impenetrable. Invitations poured in from universities, research institutions, and tech companies eager to collaborate with her. Some offered lucrative positions, while others proposed partnerships to further develop her groundbreaking hypothesis. Despite the flurry of attention, Elena remained steadfast in her mission to use her work not just for personal success, but to inspire change and break down barriers in the world of science. One of the first major milestones came when Elena was awarded a prestigious fellowship at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research. It was a dream come true, working alongside some of the brightest minds in physics, using cutting-edge technology to test her theories. Her time at CERN was intense but exhilarating. She spent long hours analyzing data, running simulations, and collaborating with teams of researchers from around the globe. Though the work was demanding, Elena thrived in the collaborative environment, learning as much from her colleagues as they did from her. During this period, Elena also began advocating for diversity in STEM fields. She noticed that even within such a renowned institution as CERN, women and people from underrepresented backgrounds were still a minority. Determined to make a difference, she started organizing workshops and panel discussions aimed at encouraging young students from diverse communities to pursue careers in science. She shared her own story openly, emphasizing how her humble beginnings had shaped her journey and fueled her determination to succeed. Her advocacy efforts extended beyond formal events. On weekends, Elena traveled back to Ohio to speak at local schools, particularly those in underserved areas. She remembered all too well what it felt like to be underestimated because of where you came from, and she wanted to remind students that their circumstances didn't define their potential. "You don't need expensive equipment or fancy labs to be curious," she told them during one visit. "All you need is a question, and the courage to keep asking it." The impact of her outreach became evident when she received letters and emails from students who had been inspired by her talks. One letter, written by a high school senior named Jamal, stood out. He described how he'd always loved astronomy but feared pursuing it because no one in his family had ever gone to college. After hearing Elena speak, he decided to apply for scholarships and eventually earned admission to a university with a strong astrophysics program. Reading his words filled Elena with pride, not just for Jamal but for every student who dared to dream bigger because of her example. Back at Harvard, Elena continued to mentor younger students, many of whom were struggling to find their footing in a competitive academic environment. She understood their struggles intimately, having faced similar challenges herself. She encouraged them to embrace failure as part of the learning process, and reminded them that intelligence wasn't measured by grades alone, but by curiosity, resilience, and the willingness to push boundaries. Professor Langley, now retired, occasionally attended these mentoring sessions. His presence surprised many, given his reputation for being harsh and unapproachable. But over time, he had become more introspective, often reflecting on his past behavior and its impact on students like Elena. During one session, he pulled Elena aside and said, "I want to thank you for showing me that brilliance can come from anywhere, and for reminding me why I fell in love with teaching in the first place." Though their relationship remained professional, Elena acknowledged his efforts with quiet respect. She knew that real change took time, and seeing Langley take steps toward becoming a better mentor gave her hope for the future of education. As her career advanced, Elena's contributions to theoretical physics gained widespread acclaim. Her hypothesis about string theory and quantum entanglement was published in several peer-reviewed journals, sparking debates and inspiring new lines of inquiry. Scientists around the world began building on her work, conducting experiments to validate her predictions. When experimental evidence emerged supporting key aspects of her theory, it solidified her status as a trailblazer in the field. But perhaps the most significant moment came years later, when Elena was nominated for and ultimately won the Nobel Prize in Physics. Standing on the stage in Stockholm surrounded by luminaries from various disciplines, she delivered an acceptance speech that moved the audience to tears. "This award isn't just mine," she said, looking out at the crowd. "It belongs to my father, who worked tirelessly to give me opportunities he never had, to my teachers who believed in me when others doubted, and to every person who has ever been told they don't belong. Your voices matter, your dreams matter, and your brilliance has the power to change the world." Her words resonated deeply, earning standing ovations not only from the attendees but also from viewers watching the ceremony online. Back home, Miguel watched the broadcast with tears streaming down his face. For so many years he had sacrificed everything to provide for his daughter, and now seeing her honored on such a grand stage filled him with overwhelming gratitude. Winning the Nobel Prize catapulted Elena into a new level of fame, but she handled it with grace and humility. She used her platform to continue advocating for inclusivity in science, launching initiatives to support underrepresented groups in STEM fields. She partnered with organizations to create scholarships, internships, and mentorship programs designed to empower young scientists from diverse backgrounds. Her efforts earned her numerous accolades, including honorary degrees and humanitarian awards. But none meant as much to her as the letters from students who credited her with changing their lives. Even as her accomplishments mounted, Elena never forgot her roots. Every summer, she returned to Ohio to spend time with her father. They would sit together on the porch of their old apartment, reminiscing about the days when she solved equations on scraps of paper while he told stories about his work as a janitor. Those moments grounded her, reminding her of how far she'd come and how much farther she hoped to go. Through it all, Elena remained driven by the same passion that had fueled her since childhood, the desire to understand the universe and share that understanding with others. Whether she was lecturing at conferences, mentoring students, or simply gazing at the stars, she carried with her the lessons she'd learned along the way. That brilliance knows no boundaries, resilience is a superpower, and kindness can transform even the hardest hearts. And though she had achieved more than she ever imagined, Elena knew her journey was far from over. There were still mysteries to unravel, questions to answer, and lives to touch. As she looked to the future, she did so with the same determination and optimism that had carried her through every challenge. Because for Elena Martinez, the girl who touched the whiteboard and stunned everyone, the best was yet to come. Years passed, and Elena Martinez's legacy only grew stronger. Her groundbreaking work in theoretical physics continued to inspire scientists around the globe, sparking new discoveries and reshaping how humanity understood the universe. But, for Elena, her greatest achievements weren't measured by awards or accolades. They were found in the lives she touched and the barriers she helped dismantle. Elena eventually returned to Harvard, not as a student, but as a professor. The university had offered her a faculty position shortly after her Nobel Prize win, and though she received offers from prestigious institutions worldwide, something about coming back to the place where her journey began felt right. She remembered the doubts she'd faced, the whispers behind her back, and the moment Professor Langley had mocked her. Now, standing at the front of the same lecture hall where she'd once been ridiculed, Elena couldn't help but smile. Life had a way of turning tables, and she was determined to ensure that no other student would ever feel out of place there again. As a professor, Elena brought a unique perspective to teaching. She didn't just focus on equations and theories. She emphasized curiosity, creativity, and resilience. On the first day of class, she always shared her story with her students, the struggles, the triumphs, and everything in between. Science isn't about perfection, she told them. It's about asking questions, making mistakes, and learning from them. If you're willing to keep pushing forward, you'll find your place here. Her approach resonated deeply with her students. Many came from backgrounds similar to hers, first-generation college students, immigrants, or individuals who had been told they didn't belong in academia. To see someone like Elena, a woman who had overcome so much, standing before them, as proof that success was possible, gave them hope. They flocked to her office hours, eager to discuss not just their coursework, but also their fears and aspirations. Elena listened patiently, offering advice drawn from her own experiences. "You are capable of more than you think," she often said. "Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." One of Elena's most cherished projects was establishing the Martinez Fellowship Program, named in honor of Iwan, her father. Funded through donations and grants, the program provided scholarships, mentorship, and research opportunities to underrepresented students pursuing careers in STEM fields. Every year, Elena personally reviewed applications, looking for candidates who demonstrated passion, determination, and a hunger to learn. When the first cohort of fellows graduated, many went on to pursue advanced degrees or launch successful careers in science and engineering. Their achievements became a source of immense pride for Elena, knowing she had played a role in shaping their futures. Outside the classroom, Elena remained an advocate for inclusivity in science. She traveled extensively, delivering keynote speeches at conferences, universities, and community events. Her talks combined humor, humility, and wisdom, leaving audiences inspired to challenge stereotypes and embrace diversity. One memorable speech took place at a global summit on education reform. Addressing world leaders, educators, and policymakers, Elena urged them to rethink traditional models of learning. We must create spaces where every voice is heard and valued, she said, because the next great discovery could come from someone you least expect. Her advocacy extended beyond words. Elena collaborated with tech companies to develop tools that made scientific research more accessible to underserved communities. She partnered with schools to create hands-on programs that introduced children to concepts in math and science early on. And she worked tirelessly to amplify the voices of marginalized groups within the scientific community, ensuring their contributions were recognized and celebrated. Back home, Miguel watched his daughter's accomplishments with quiet awe. Though he still worked as a janitor, his job now carried a different kind of pride. People in town treated him differently, not because of what he did, but because of who he was. The father of Dr. Elena Martinez, Nobel laureate and trailblazer. Strangers approached him at the grocery store, thanking him for raising such an extraordinary daughter. Miguel always responded humbly, saying, "She did it all on her own. I just tried to give her a chance." But deep down, Miguel knew better. He had sacrificed countless hours, skipped meals, and endured hardships to provide for Elena. His love and belief in her had laid the foundation for everything she achieved. In moments of reflection, Elena acknowledged this too. During a special ceremony honoring her contributions to science, she dedicated her Lifetime Achievement Award to her father. "Without him," she said, tears glistening in her eyes, "none of this would have been possible." As the years went by, Elena's influence reached far beyond the scientific community. Books were written about her life, documentaries chronicled her journey, and museums featured exhibits celebrating her impact. Yet, despite her fame, she remained remarkably grounded. She lived modestly, refusing to indulge in the luxuries her wealth and status afforded her. Instead, she donated generously to causes close to her heart: education initiatives, housing projects for low-income families, and scholarships for aspiring scientists. Even Professor Langley, now in his late 70s, kept tabs on Elena's career. Though retired, he occasionally attended lectures or symposiums where she spoke. After one particularly moving presentation, he approached her backstage. "Dr. Martinez," he said, extending his hand, "you've changed the face of physics and perhaps more importantly, the face of academia itself." Elena shook his hand warmly, acknowledging the progress he'd made in his own journey toward humility and growth. When asked about retirement, Elena laughed. "I don't plan to slow down anytime soon," she said. "There's still so much to explore, so many questions to answer." Her current research focused on applying string theory to renewable energy solutions, hoping to address some of the planet's most pressing environmental challenges. True to form, she involved students and young researchers in every step of the process, mentoring them as they worked together to tackle real-world problems. In her quieter moments, Elena often reflected on how far she'd come. From solving equations on scraps of paper in her tiny apartment to presenting groundbreaking findings on the world stage, her journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. Yet she never lost sight of the values that had guided her: hard work, kindness, and perseverance. These principles weren't just part of her success, they were the essence of who she was. Today, Elena Martinez is remembered not just for her brilliance but for her humanity. Her story serves as a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever felt underestimated or overlooked. It reminds us that brilliance knows no boundaries, that talent can emerge from the unlikeliest places, and that with determination and support, anything is possible. And while Elena's name will forever be etched in the annals of history, it is her spirit, that indomitable spark of curiosity and compassion, that continues to inspire generations. For Elena, the girl who once dared to touch the whiteboard and stunned everyone, the true measure of success wasn't fame or fortune. It was the knowledge that she had used her gifts to make the world a little brighter, a little fairer, and a lot more hopeful for everyone.